for joining us today for disability awareness and a little discussion on referral to MRS, as well as a little discussion about the services we offer to both sides of the house, our client customer and our business customers. Thanks for having us here today. I'm Craig Saunders with Michigan Rehabilitation Services. I'm a business relations consultant covering 21 counties in northern Michigan, and here today to talk about disability awareness and the services from the business side. Susie, go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we'll get into objectives.
Good morning. Susie Olson, site manager with Michigan Rehabilitation Services. I'm based out of the Gaylord office.
All right, thank you, Susie. So we're going to start here with the objectives. Our hope today is to help the group here today learn more about disability, and as well as to talk a little bit about how to improve your interactions with people with disabilities. We're going to start by talking a little bit about perception, our thoughts about what disability is, and then give an overview of what it is, the legal definition, talk about a couple different groupings of disabilities. And through the training, we're going to talk about some disability etiquette, some do's and don'ts. We're hoping to help you gain some insight into what a disability is, and then also review some myths and misperceptions, and hopefully help to increase your interactions with persons with disabilities, to increase the comfortness of being comfortable with interacting with people with disabilities. And then we're going to get towards the end of the presentation, we're going to review some of the services that we offer from MRS. Susie is going to talk about the client customer services and a little bit about referrals to our agency. And then I'm going to finish off with some of the services the Business Network Division provides. So first on the screen, and this is going to be a little interactive. So if you go ahead and go to your chat box, I want you to tell me what you see in this picture on the right side of the screen. I realize we got a couple groups joining with us, so consensus is fine. I see a man with sax and a lady. Okay. People are seeing a couple things right off the bat. All right. Guy playing saxophone, man with a saxophone, woman's face. Thank you. So when you look at this picture, maybe the first thing you see might be someone playing a saxophone, or maybe the first thing you see might be a picture of a woman's face. But what we learn is that through a little bit of education or a little bit of knowledge, there's potentially, we can see two pictures now. Maybe you didn't see both pictures at first, but with that little bit of knowledge, you're able to change your perception a little bit. And that can happen with the subject of disability as well. So I'm going to go into a little discussion on a few questions regarding your perceptions on disability. So the first question is, what is your picture of a disability? So think of the first thing that comes to your head, that pops in your mind, and go ahead and put that in the chat. First thought or the first word.
Where's the background filters?
Morning, Anaway. Different abled. Thank you, Allison. I saw a wheelchair from the Grayling office. Thank you. Wait for a couple more. Blind. Yeah, thank you very much, Aaron. I see some more typing, so I'll give it another 5 seconds. Okay. Someone with physical impairment. Okay. So yeah, this is what happens in a lot of the trainings we offer. Usually people will think right away of something they see, something physical, something people can't do is a pretty common response. Thinking of things that people are not able to do because of a disability. The next one, this is just for reflection, so you don't have to put anything in chat. But what have you been told you cannot do? So I'm sure many of us in our lives, through our experiences, have been told you can't do that or you shouldn't do that. And like with me with hockey, I'm a 50-year-old man still playing hockey. And they tell me I probably shouldn't do that so much. But here I am after 2 days of playing hockey, talking to you today, pretty sore. but I'm still here and I'm still going to go play hockey on Sunday. So, but usually that's what happens. People tell us we can't do something. So we go and do it anyways. And that comes around with people with disabilities a lot. So people are told that a lot, that they can't do something or they shouldn't do something. And a lot of that is based on misperceptions about what a disability is or who the person is, or even fears, that the person might hurt themselves or they won't succeed and they'll be disappointed. So that happens a lot. And it really shows when we talk about disability and employment. So the last question, how many more times does a person with a disability have to interview to obtain a job compared to a person without a disability? So go ahead and put your number in there. Is it 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times? What do you think? See a 10 times, a 5 times, 3 times, 3. Okay. Well, Allison got it right off the bat. 10 times. And again, a lot of times that it's 10 times because people don't have an understanding of what persons with disabilities, what their capabilities are, and they may have those misperceptions and fears when it comes to hiring someone with a disability. Next, I want to talk a little bit about the impact. When you look at the stats on the left side of your screen, we have nationwide stats. It's about 26% of persons within the United States have some type of disability. And then when we look specifically at Michigan, it's actually a little higher. I don't know why it's higher. I don't know if it's just a recording thing or if it's maybe we have more elderly people coming to our state and leaving in the winter, but they're still classified here in the state of Michigan. And we know usually as we age, the potential to get a disability increases. So it is a little higher in Michigan. But a couple of the other stats I want to look at are when it comes to employment with persons with disabilities. We look at a study that was done in 2020. 29% of workers with a disability were employed part-time compared to 16% without a disability. So that just means that more people are working part-time when they have a disability compared to those without a disability. So there's a higher percentage of persons are working part-time as opposed to full-time. The other stat in 2020 was that just under 18% of persons with a disability were employed. That was down from 19.3%. So the percentage of people working with disabilities is lower than our average when you look at the general population. That number has come back up. I haven't put the new stats in here yet. I believe we're back up in the 19%, so that's good. We're moving in the right direction. So next, I want to define disability according to the Americans with Disability Act. So in the world of vocational rehab and defining a disability, we use a legal definition as opposed to a medical definition. Now, agencies like Social Security Administration, they're going to use a medical definition. For us, we have this definition that was designed to help protect persons with disabilities, protect their rights when it comes to employment. So the ADA defines a person with a disability as a person who has a physical or mental impairment that one substantially limits one or more major life activities. So go ahead and go to your chat again and tell me, what do you think a major life activity is? Give me some examples of what you think a major life activity is. Walking. Thank you, Mary. I see hygiene from the Grayling office. Thank you. Work, education, medical access. Allison, thank you. Got a couple more walkings. Walking's a big one. Yeah. Major like important or major like done daily. Aaron, you bring up a good subject. That's what it is. It's the things we do every day to get through our life, and they can be the little things. Talking, communication. I see that coming from Monoway. It can be walking. It can be working. It can be standing. It can be sleeping, getting dressed. Thank you, Aaron. But yeah, it's all the things we do every day to get through our lives, for work, for personal lives, for fun. It's the things we do every day and day in and day out. The next section of defining a disability talks about including people who have a record of an impairment or history of a disability, but may not currently have a disability. So this comes into play with persons who might be taking medication or getting treatment that limits the effect on those daily activities. So maybe someone's taking anti-anxiety or antidepressant medications and it's no longer affecting their day in and day out major life activities. But they're still protected under the ADA, because without that treatment, there could be some pretty substantial limitations to the person's daily life activities. The final point includes individuals who do not have a disability, but may be regarded as having a disability. Now, this one's a little more difficult to understand, so I'd like to lay out an example for this to kind of explain it. You have someone who's working in a manufacturing company, and they get in a bad car accident. They maybe break both legs. They have a head injury. They have all these different injuries. They go through treatment. The legs are healed up. The head injury wasn't too bad, thankfully. They come back to work. And when they come back to work, they get right back into work, and they apply for a promotion within the company. And the management team is reviewing the applications for the promotion, and they go, well, he was in a pretty bad car wreck last year. I don't know if he could do these functions of this job. Well, they're assuming that this person cannot do the primary functions of the job when this person has gone through the injuries and healed and doesn't have any side effects or any limitations to their daily living skills or major life activities. So that person would still be protected under the ADA, even though they don't even have a disability. All right, next thing I want to talk about is a couple different groupings of disabilities, the visible versus invisible, or also we call them the hidden disabilities. When we talk about visible disabilities, we're talking about things you see right off the bat. It could be someone using a scooter or a wheelchair, someone with hearing aids. It's obvious, it's apparent right away. You can see it. When we talk about the invisible side, we're talking about things you can't see, things that are internal. It could be a brain injury, traumatic brain injury. It could be arthritis, ADHD. It's things you don't notice. They're not physically seen. Now, I'll give an example. Let's say you're pulling into the parking lot at, we'll pick Walgreens, and you pull in and you see another car go by you, and they pull in, they park in the accessible parking spot right up front. And they get out of the car and they hop out and they go into the building. And you're sitting there going, I thought those were for people with disabilities. That person looked like they just, jumped right out of the car and they're ready to go. Well, what you don't know is maybe that person has a disability that has some pretty significant limitations at times. Like example would be lupus or chronic fatigue. And maybe this is the first time they've been out of the house in like 2 weeks, and they're having a great day. And well, they're able to get around that day. But because you don't know that, and because it's a hidden disability, a lot of times it's hard for people to understand that people can have limitations when you can't see it. So it's hard to accept it at times that people are struggling with different limitations when you cannot see it visibly. I've got a list here of invisible disabilities. Let's put my disclosure up. It's not all inclusive. This huge list can be considered a disability if it creates a barrier or a limitation to a major life activity. So there is, but 96% of people with a chronic medical condition don't have any outward signs of a disability. But 10% of persons with a chronic disability or invisible disability have some pretty significant barriers when it comes to major life activities. So you also have a group of people who may have one of these diagnoses and may have some major limitations to their daily life activities, but still will say, I don't have a disability. But they're still protected under the ADA, the Americans with Disability Act, because they do have one of these diagnoses that creates a barrier to major life activities. All right, so now we're going to move into a little bit of etiquette, some questions. This is a true and false question we'll start with. When a person avoids eye contact with you in a social setting, it's usually a good sign that they are evasive or hiding something. True or false? I see a lot of falses. Thank you for sharing, Aaron. I'm terrible with eye contact. Thank you. Wow. Has everyone been through this training before? Nailing it. False. Yep, the answer is false. So here's what could happen. You could have someone who might have a different type of social beliefs or think that eye contact is a sign of disrespect. So it could be a cultural thing. But you also have some disabilities where eye contact is uncomfortable, or where eye contact is something that people just don't do. And the problem with this is you're generalizing is kind of what you're doing if you think that somebody's hiding or evasive, because it could be many other factors, could be disability related or cultural related. This also makes me think about growing up as a kid and my dad telling me, you can always trust a man by his handshake. Well, I've met a lot of people in my lifetime that may not have a very good handshake, a good firm handshake, because of other factors like rheumatoid arthritis or being on the spectrum, just doesn't want to have that interaction. So you can't assume that someone is evasive or hiding something or may not be a trustful person because of that physical lack of handshakes or because of the eye contact lack. So, and I saw someone add social anxiety. Yep, that's another big one too that causes that. Thank you. The next slide, we're talking about when you're working with someone who has an interpreter, American Sign Language interpreter, someone who is deaf. It's important that the interaction you have is with the person with the disability. The person that's there as functioning as a sign language interpreter, they are there to help get the communication points across clearly. They're there as a I hate to say a tool, but as a resource for someone with a disability to get good, clear communication. It's important that you keep your eye contact with the person with the disability and direct all your attention and communication to that person. And if the person needs other assistance or needs the interpreter to assist in other ways, they'll ask for that assistance. But it's important that you give all your attention to the person with the disability in your communications. Another true or false question. Persons who are blind generally have exceptional skill in recognizing voices. True or false? I see mostly false. I see a true. Okay, so mostly falses. So Kelly, I don't want to call you out, but are you a Marvel fan? I got to know. No, because I bring this up all the time because the answer is false. But there are Marvel characters who have exceptional skills in seeing and hearing, but they are blind. Daredevil. But yes, this is what we call a generalization. What happens when you think that someone who is blind can see or can hear better is you're assuming that every person who is blind is going to have that skill to be able to hear better or to be able to recognize people's voices better. With familiarity, yes, people will learn to recognize voices, but that's everybody. Anybody who practices or works with some people consistently, they're going to get used to somebody's voice over time. But you can't expect that to be a continuous ongoing skill that somebody's gained because they lost one ability. Their other abilities aren't going to improve that much better. But yeah, Kelly, thank you for sharing. Macular degeneration could recognize voices. Yeah, it's a skill. We have people that work in the industry of being spies, and they can read lips really good, and they can hear really good, but it's a practice skill. They go to school for it. Your mom would have been great for that. So say what you see. So more on the subject of working with someone who is blind, you have to remember that you become the eyes for the person who is blind. So it's good to, oh, good morning. So it's good to remember to introduce yourself when you're working with someone who is blind. And it also is very helpful to maybe mention how you know each other, maybe a project you worked on together in the past, some other type of information that will help the person recall who you are. It's also important to do things like describe the area that you're walking into, um, making sure that the area is clear of any obstacles. You want to make sure there's a clear pathway from the entryway of your building to the meeting room you're going to be in, to the restroom. Just making sure it's a safe environment for somebody who is blind so that they can navigate the area safely. All right, another true and false question. When you learn you're going to work with a person with a disability, it's a good idea to research the disability so you will know more about it. True or false? I see some truths. I see some truths. Truths. I see one false. Right. Thank you very much for your votes. The answer is actually false. So here's the thing about researching a disability. It will give you general information about a disability. However, each person with a disability, even with the same disability, is going to be different than the other person. I like to say there's a wide range of ability within each disability. So the important part to do is to focus on the person's skills, their expertise, their education, what they're able to do. Now, research does come into play sometimes, and we'll get this question afterwards about, well, I'm trying to figure out how to help somebody with a reasonable accommodation. You can get some general information about reasonable accommodations, but it's still best to ask the person with the disability. Say, what is the best way for us to accommodate you? Because usually that person's lived with their disability for a while and they've figured out how to accommodate themselves. All right, offering assistance. If you offer assistance, wait till the offer is accepted and then listen and ask for instructions. Again, people with disabilities have learned to function in a society that's not necessarily built for them. They've learned the tricks and the ways to get through doors and the ways to drive a car, getting the adaptions they need in order to function in this world. It's okay to ask, but just don't be offended if they say, no, I'm good, I got this, because they've learned to function in this world. True or false? People who have a mental health condition can successfully maintain long-term employment. Right, seeing a lot of truths. Right, good job. Yeah, so many people with mental health conditions are amongst us. Many of us are dealing with mental health, the depression, anxiety. Aaron, thank you very much for sharing. There's many of us that are doing that right now too. But what's important to remember is that it's pretty prevalent, especially since COVID. It seems like it's grown some, and maybe it's not that the disability itself has grown, but the acceptance has grown. People are more aware of depression and anxiety. So those numbers seem to increase, but I think they've always been there. It's just I think people are more accepting to talk about it, more accepting to ask for help. And that's what's happening. The number one and number two prescribed medications are related to anxiety and depression, medications. So it's pretty prevalent in our society. And it's important to remember that there are times where medication and treatment can help tremendously, but there's also reasonable accommodations that can help a person who's struggling with mental health in the workplace. And always don't be afraid to talk to your supervisor or to your HR manager about how they can accommodate you in the workplace when it comes to mental health. And don't be afraid to reach out to us too. We're here for you. Treat adults as adults. So this comes up many moons ago. I worked in a home for some pretty significantly disabled persons who were going to live in this home pretty much the rest of their lives. And when I first walked into this building, I noticed that some of the staff were addressing people by names that were more childish. Instead of Tim, it was Timmy, and Jim, Jimmy, Johnny, Johnny, John, Johnny. It was treating them more like children as opposed to the adults that they were. So it's important in the workplace that you recognize if someone has a visible disability and may be differently abled than you, to address them the same way you would address anybody else in the workplace, either by first name, if that's how it's done, or by Mr., Miss, Mrs., Mrs. Just use the same address you would use with anybody. And that's also important to never patronize people in the wheelchair. And this could include things like patting someone on the head or patting them on the shoulder or leaning up against their chair. And we're going to get into a little bit more about the chair, someone using a chair with respect personal space. So again, don't lean on the chairs. Don't hang things off of the chairs. That's an extension of somebody. It's their way of getting around. It's an extension of their body. And this could include things like scooters or wheelchairs, canes, anything that someone's using as a source of mobility. So this also applies to someone who may be using a service animal. Those animals have been trained to help someone because of a disability. They're there to provide a service for the person to function in our world. And it's not good to interrupt that dog or animal as they're working. There are times where it's okay for you to interact with the animal, but you have to ask first. You can ask, can I please pet your dog, or can I please interact with your animal? And the important thing to remember is just to not be offended if they say no, because again, that dog or that service animal is working for the person and helping them function in their work environment. Right, another true or false. If someone has hearing loss, it means they need an interpreter to do their job. Right, I'm seeing some falses. All right, great. Nailing it. False is right. So this for interpreters, typically it'll have to be someone who is deaf who uses American Sign Language, which is a totally different language from the spoken English that we speak. So someone with hearing loss, it could be someone who's using hearing aids. It could be someone who is not quite ready to use hearing aids but has hearing loss. They don't necessarily need an interpreter. Even someone who does use an American Sign Language interpreter may not need an interpreter, or usually doesn't need an interpreter ongoing. It's always a good idea, and we always recommend an interpreter for things like interviews, reviews of performance, to talk about any disciplinary actions or legal issues. But when it comes to daily work life, there's other forms of communication, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit, that can be used. but it's always best to direct that question to the person with the disability. What's the best way for us to communicate? What's the best way for us to function in the workplace? Because typically an interpreter is not going to be needed year round. All right, so on more of the subject of hard of hearing. So this comes up a lot when you're working with people in the workplace, because a lot of people don't want to say they have hearing loss. It takes an average of 7 years before someone will finally admit that they have hearing loss. They've dealt with it for that many years before they go and seek help. We also have an organization, the WHO, not the pinball wizard WHO, but the World Health Organization. They have statistics out there that state that a large percentage of persons in the world are going to be dealing with hearing loss in the near future. So it's a growing epidemic is what they're calling it. Can anyone guess why hearing loss seems to be a growing epidemic, not just in our country, but worldwide? Go ahead and put it in the chat. What do you think is causing an increase in hearing loss? Cell phones, earbuds, yep. Kelly, you nailed it. Earbuds is the, or wait, I'm sorry, Aaron. Aaron nailed it. Yeah, Aaron and Kelly, technology. Yep. I see the Grayling office, Gaylord office, ADLs. All right, Onaway office, ADLs. You're going to have to clarify that for me. Use of tech and earbuds. All right, but yes, so the biggest one is technology. That's what's the biggest issue. Q-tips, yeah, people getting too deep. Activities of daily living. Thanks, Onaway. I've heard of that one before. But yes, it's a lot of it is technology, and the earbuds are the biggest culprit. That noise funneling right into your ears. It's increasing the amount of persons who are dealing with hearing loss. We also have things like medical issues or medication issues. You know, we have this technology. We're able to build all these great medicines to help people to get better from illnesses or to even survive. Like we worked with a case, someone who was diagnosed with cancer and received the medication to get rid of the cancer and survive the cancer. Now is clean and clear. However, they have pretty significant hearing loss now because of that medication. And the person told us, hey, I didn't like the fact that I lost my hearing, but I'm still alive. So there's just things like that that have increased the ability for people to live longer. So hearing's going to get worse as you get older. Jessica, gunshots without ear protection. Yeah, that's all of us. I call it my boom boom ear. Years of duck hunting and deer hunting. It catches up with us. But it's important to not assume. If you know someone has hearing loss, try to get clarification in your communication after the fact. And we're going to talk about that next. Or after this question, sorry. First, this question. Percentage of accuracy for persons who lip read is, now I'm going to give you a range, 10 to 20%, 20 to 30, 30 to 40, or 40 to 50. Seeing a mix. Oh, I should have said 40 to 60, sorry. Forgot to say 40 to 60, but anybody who got close to 40 wins. Talk to Jessica, she'll get you your prize. So yes, 40 to 60% is the accuracy, and that's pretty much the same for people who have hearing. Being able to lip read, it's hard to get to this level without some practice. But it's another generalization that people assume sometimes that people are going to be able to hear better when someone has lost a sense, or they're going to be able to lip read and see better when someone has lost a sense. So it's good not to assume that someone's going to be able to hear just because, or be able to read your lips because they can't hear. So on to communication. I mentioned this a little bit in the last couple slides. It's important. Oops, sorry, bounced forward. It's important to not assume that communication was understood. And one example I'll give you was a coworker we used to have in our agency who had some pretty profound hearing loss, but had spent a lot of his life saying, "Yep, I got it. Okay," and just shaking his head. What we found was he missed a lot. So what we did as a follow-up is we would do an email follow-up with all the points we discussed and the tasks this person was supposed to do as they were providing placement services for us. And they were helping us with helping our client customers get to work. We needed to make sure the communication was clear. So we found that follow-up communication made a huge change in the person's performance because they were actually able to get that communication clearly and do the task that we needed them to do. It's also important to remember that other input can help when conversing. This other input could be, let's say you're working on a project, having a written document with you on that project. Could be someone who's working in construction, having a blueprint, available. Just other reference points to be able to bring into the conversation so the person can pick up some of that conversation or communication through those extra inputs that you have available. It's also important to get someone's attention and so they can face you. And it helps with the clear communication when someone's able to look at you eye to eye. Ask the person with hearing loss, what is the best way for us to have a conversation? It could be having that conversation out on the floor where everybody's bustling around is not the best place to have that communication. It might be better to have that in a smaller office where there's not as much background noise, no traffic noise, no heaters or air conditioners going off and making noise, or people walking by, or other conversations. But trying to eliminate a lot of that background noise is important when working with someone with hearing loss. Rephrase if you're not understood. Sometimes it's the sounds, the different, the PH sounds or the SH sounds. It's different sounds that someone can't hear. So sometimes rephrasing a word or rephrasing the situation or communication a different way can help the person to clearly understand what you're trying to say. It's also important to not shout. So on the slide when we talked about lip reading, it was about a 40 to 60% capability of lip reading. Well, when you shout, your lips move differently. Your mouth moves differently. So it makes it even more difficult. If someone has significant hearing loss, shouting is not going to help. Just speak in a normal tone. And if that's not working, then find other ways to communicate. And those other ways could be written communication, texting, email. And there's lots of other forms of communication that can be used that might be better. Remember to be patient if response is slow when you're working with someone with hearing loss, because they may be taking the information that they're hearing, that they're able to hear. They may be using a little bit of those lip reading skills. And they also may be taking information from previous meetings, information from a document that's in front of them. And it may take a little longer to get all that information together to form a response. So just remember to be patient. And I think I already talked about talking directly. Face to face is the best communication when working with somebody with hearing loss. All right, true or false? If a job applicant has speech that is difficult to understand, the business should ask a person to bring in someone to interpret. True or false? And I see a false. Some more falses. Okay. Good job. I'm seeing a lot of falses. Good job. Yep, the answer is false. And to talk more about this, I'm going to go to the next slide. If you can communicate in writing. Good job, Kelly. Yep. There are other forms of communication. Exactly. You can use writing, you can use texting, you can use emailing. other forms that work best. And it's always best to ask, what is the best way for us to communicate? But it's important to, when you're working with somebody who may have a stutter, and maybe they have cerebral palsy or some other stuttering disorder, that you give them the time to say what they want to say. Try not to interrupt them as they're speaking. Try not to finish their sentences because they may be going a totally different direction. It's make sure that you allow the person to speak what they want to say. Sometimes the communication can be made easier if we're able to ask questions that can get a response of a yes or no or a nod of the head. And it's always okay to ask somebody who has a stutter to please repeat what you said or please say it in a different way. I can tell you, someone who grew up with a stutter is going to know that sometimes people don't understand them, and they're going to be okay with it. They get it. They realize sometimes their speech can be hard to understand. So it's okay to ask to repeat or to find another way to communicate. But most importantly, never pretend to understand that you, or never pretend that you understood what they said if you don't. Always ask for clarification and always ask for other forms of communication to make sure that the person with this who has a stutter is able to get their point across. All right, so we're getting ready to tie up disability etiquette portion of the training today. But what I really want to share is just relax. People with disabilities are people, just like us. It's okay, if you say something that you may feel might be related to somebody's disability, like there's common expressions as "see you later," if you're working with somebody who's blind, or "did you hear about this?" if you're working with somebody who might have hearing loss. It's okay. It's a common expression. Everybody uses it. I want to share a story from my past working with previous Lieutenant Governor Brian Calley and Michigan Supreme Court Justice Richard Bernstein. And for those of you who do not know Richard Bernstein, he is blind. First Michigan State blind judge within the state of Michigan. And they had a meeting one time, and Callie came in and said, "Richard," because he calls him Richard because he can, "it's good to see you again." And as soon as he said it, he was like, "Why did I say that? I should have never said that. I probably hurt his feelings. I'm sure I offended him at least." So the meeting went on, and the whole time in the back of Callie's head is just eating at him. It's like, man, I should have never said that. Well, the meeting got done, and he says, "Richard, it was great to see you. I'm sorry that I said that. I feel really bad. I hope I didn't offend you." And Supreme Court Justice Bernstein said, "Don't worry about it. I say it all the time. It's just a common expression. So don't be afraid." We gave a lot of rules and a lot of etiquette today, but just remember, just treat people as people. We're all here in the same world together. Just be yourself and don't be afraid. Just make sure that you do the best you can to have clear communication and treat people with respect, just as like you would anybody. All right, so etiquette is complete. I'm going to turn it over to Susie to take over to talk a little bit about MRS and our client customer services.
Thanks, Craig. Boy, snow on the ground. This was not taken today. I hope I'm not in Gaylord today.
Next week.
All right. So thanks for hanging in. And I know many of you. Again, Susie Olson. I'm a site manager based out of our Gaylord office. Our district rather serves the northern 21 counties of the Lower Peninsula. So we're from Iosco over to Manistee and up to the bridge. Next slide. What is vocational rehabilitation? So we are a federally mandated program. We're in every state, territory in the District of Columbia. The goal for vocational rehabilitation is careers for qualified individuals with disabilities. Next slide. Our mission is to develop customized workforce solutions for businesses and individuals with disabilities, to create a diverse and inclusive workforce that unites businesses and individuals with disabilities towards a common good. Vocational Rehabilitation Services, MRS, has two primary customers. First, individual with a disability. We have locations throughout Michigan. We're really fortunate since we left one department in the state and moved over to the newly created Leo a couple of years ago, that we were able to move back and co-locate within Michigan's Works offices across the state. Again, we have locations across the state of Michigan. 37,483 provided vocational counseling, job placement, and retention services. Our dual customer, other customer is business customer. Over 4,600 businesses to match and retain qualified workers, as well as provide information and consultation. And that's the service, the primary service that Craig and his team provide across the state, is consultation to our business customers. So this slide talks a little bit about the timeline of the ADA. We just starts with really the Civil Rights Act 1964, and moving on really to the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and the Americans with Disabilities Act in 1990. Civil rights for individuals with disabilities is relatively new in our history. It hasn't been that long. Really since things like access into buildings, fair access to employment, were rights that people with disabilities were granted. Next slide.
Right, I forgot to take timeline slide number 2 out, so we'll move on. Okay,
sounds good. We operate under the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act as well. And our piece of that is to provide individuals with disabilities the services they need to compete for and achieve high quality employment in the 21st century global economy. As I said before, MRS is everywhere. We have services in all of the counties in the state. Our county, or our district rather, Northern Michigan District, services the northern 21 counties, covering 11,158 square miles. We're actually the largest district for MRS in the state. I was a little surprised. I thought we were smaller than the UP, but I guess not. Next slide. So the individuals that we serve, this is a little from a couple of years ago, but it's generally still true with probably a little tweaks here and there. The largest, we serve a variety of people with a variety of different disabilities. The largest portion have a mental health diagnosis of 28.4%. But we provide a variety of different services for many different people. As Craig talked about before, we define disability, and the counselors work with customers who have an impairment in one or more areas of life functioning and need MRS support to be able to find and maintain employment. Something that we talk about quite a bit is the return on investment. So every VR dollar that's spent returns $10.80 to Michigan's economy. There's a variety of reasons why VR makes sense, not only for the services that we provide to individuals, but really to the state of Michigan as a whole. There's a decrease in dependence on public assistance, increase in taxes paid by employers, increase in personal income. And I'm sorry, we hadn't gone over this slide. 18 million paid annually in state and federal income taxes by employed individuals. Next slide. Thanks, Greg. Sorry about that. We have a process that we go through for individuals who are seeking employment. To be eligible, as we mentioned before, a person has to have a disability, which creates an impediment to employment. They must require individualized services, and must be seeking employment. We work with people who are looking for both part-time and full-time employment, people who are already employed and need our services to maintain their employment, and people who are seeking employment or unemployed and looking for work. So the process first is the referral and application. The next part is that we determine eligibility. And this is the part I think that can be confusing to folks sometimes when they fill out the application. The rules that that say what we need to do say that we have up to 60 days to determine eligibility. And sometimes it does take that long and even longer. So what our counselors typically do is first try to obtain records from different providers that are working with an individual. So it might be a primary care specialist that someone's seeing, a counselor, a psychologist, a mental health professional, etc. If those records aren't available, then our agency can pay for testing to determine whether somebody's eligible for services or not. But obtaining those records and completing the testing does take time. So something that we do try to let people know as soon as they complete an application is this is not an emergency service and it's not an overnight service. It can take, again, up to 60 days to determine eligibility for services. Once we determine if somebody's eligible, the next piece is to work with them on something we call a vocational needs assessment. And the purpose of that is to create an individual plan for employment, or an IPE. So the vocational needs assessment takes a look at not only what they're interested in doing, but what their limitations are to employment and what types of services or accommodations the individual might need to find or maintain a job. We have 90 days to develop a IPE, or individual plan for employment, with an individual. So again, it can take, all things combined, 60 days to determine eligibility and 90 days to develop a plan. And as all of you know, when someone walks into Michigan Works, they're not typically waiting, 3-4 months to find a job. So it certainly can be frustrating for individuals in the referred. And that's why I do encourage our counselors to talk to people and let them know that, the reason that there is a timeline for our services and why sometimes it takes that length of time. Once an IP is created, then we carry through with the plan of services. When somebody has obtained a job, we generally follow up for at least 90 days, sometimes longer, depending on what the needs of the individual are, and then we can close the case successfully. So somebody might have a case open with our agency as little as maybe 4 to 6 months. So typically that might be someone that's looking for assistance with the purchase of a hearing aid, or paying for some short-term physical, occupational, and mental health therapy to maintain employment. But we have worked with individuals as long as, 8 to 10 years, if not longer. So folks that are perhaps pursuing an advanced degree, and our agency is helping to support them to achieve that degree and that employment in it. So typical length of case for our agency, though, generally is a couple of years. Next slide. So what makes a good referral? Does the individual want to work and have the ability? Does the customer have a disability that results in a substantial barrier to employment? And we are not asking, I want to be really clear on that piece, we're not asking anybody to make that determination. I really appreciate all of you and the referrals that you've been giving to our agency. We certainly had referrals before co-locating, but those have increased substantially in the last several years. And we appreciate that. And so certainly if someone identifies as a person with an individual, or someone may be able to benefit from services, having them follow up with the counselor in that office is a great first step. Does the person's condition cause difficulty in preparing for, getting, or keeping a job? And does the customer require MRS services to obtain or keep employment? So again, we can support people not only who are looking for work, but also those that are currently working that might need some follow-up support to be able to maintain their job. An office in our Ogama County area, referred somebody who needed support with their electric scooter and making sure that that was working properly so they could maintain their job. We work with, as I mentioned before, a number of people who might need support with hearing aids and they don't have insurance coverage to provide that. So there's certainly a lot of different reasons why somebody might benefit from MRS services. Next slide. As I said before, MRS assists people with disabilities to prepare for, find, or keep a job. We help people preparing for employment, finding jobs, accommodations. So we work with both the individual and the business to seek out accommodations that might help that person to be able to perform the essential functions of their employment. While we don't provide additional resources, we certainly help people to connect with them. So if someone, for example, needed additional information or assistance with housing, while we don't assist with housing, we do referrals to places like the Centers for Independent Living or other agencies in our area that can support individuals with disabilities and their needs. MRS also has our own vocational training school called Michigan Career and Technical Institute. It's located in Plainwell, which is near Kalamazoo. They have a variety of different vocational training programs. It's available for all ages. I think the median age right now is 23, if I remember correctly. So it does tend to skew younger, like some training programs. The programs that are listed that we have are listed here. Students that live on campus and attend anywhere from one term, which is 16 weeks, to I believe the longest one is 6 terms. The great part about the program is it focuses on vocational skills and career readiness. And there's no cost to our customers who attend the college. MRS also assists with other types of training programs. I know we've been able to partner together to support individuals to attend other types of training programs as well. So we do have customers that are attending community college, are attending university, and working on advanced degrees. Next slide. What we are not is an emergency relief agency. As I mentioned before, we can refer people to other community resources, but we do not provide emergency relief for individuals. I think one of the biggest frustrations that I see from folks that are referred to us is, I need a job yesterday. While certainly we wouldn't take 60 days just because we can, sometimes, again, it just takes time to determine whether or not somebody's eligible for services with our agency.
All right. Thank you, Susie. Appreciate that feedback from the client customer side. We're going to move into the business services side. I will tell you that we interact a lot between Susie, myself, and the counselors in the office. So a lot of the services that Susie described and a lot of the services I'm going to go into, we're both working together. We're all working together as a team, not only within our division and within our MRS agency, but with our partners, with Michigan Works, with MEDC, with our vet reps, with our community colleges. We're reaching out to everybody, working together as a team. As many of us have learned in Northern Michigan, in order to have enough resources for everyone we want to serve, we need to work together. So we appreciate your partnership over these many years from Northeast Michigan Consortium. Thank you. So the Business Network Division, we're built similarly to the client customer service side. We have representatives like myself across the whole state of Michigan. We try to be accessible for businesses at every corner of our state. We have some licensed and nationally certified rehab counselors. We have those counselors on our team are there to help with specific cases within the district. And those cases typically involve other entities like workers' compensation cases, automotive cases, automotive insurance cases, situations where we actually bill them for the services we provide to our client customers because they have an open case from auto or workers' comp. We also have occupational therapists and occupational safety advisors. This team, they come to us they get training in vocational rehab, working with people with disabilities and trying to figure out how to get people to work. But they also have that medical background. And with combining those two thoughts, they can help a lot with people with disabilities who are looking to get into the workplace. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as I go through some of the services we provide. And then the last person listed here, the last group listed here are the certified business solutions professionals. Yes, our business relations consultants like myself, we have been through Michigan Works Association certified business solutions professional training. We want to approach business the same way as you do. We honor point of contact. A lot of times I'll work with my Michigan Works partners and reach out before I come into that territory because I do cover the same 21 counties that Northern Michigan District does cover of Northern Michigan. So I'll reach out to my counterparts, my business services staff at the 3 Michigan Works I work with, Northwest, Northeast, and 7B, before I go into town, because I want to make sure I'm not stepping on anybody's toes. I don't want to just approach a business without informing my coworkers first, because there's a lot of times where we can share some pretty useful information from connections we've made in the community and work together to help provide services to our mutual customers. So jumping into some of the services. As a business service provider, I work with business a lot to help them with some recruiting. They'll share their job leads with me, and then I'll reach out to my connections, which include our counselors in the districts. It also includes my VA reps, and also can include my business services staff to let them know that, hey, I've got a business who needs somebody of this caliber. It helps with recruiting with the business. So it's usually I'm trying to help our persons with disabilities get into employment, but I don't always have a candidate. So I'm also trying to help the business. So I'll connect them with our Michigan Works staff, with our VA staff, to try to help them find and meet their needs. We also help with developing job coaching. That's something that comes from the client service side for our staff that are in a place of employment who may need coaching in order to be successful in the job. We also work with businesses a lot to set up on-site supports or like a mentor. So there's times where they may have a staff person who is a really good fit to help someone with a disability to learn the job. So it makes sense to help develop that relationship because you have a person that's already employed there and understands the work, who can be a great support for someone with a disability coming into a new work environment. We also assist with some transferable skills analysis. This is where you take someone who maybe had a career in a previous, before injury or before disability that maybe they can no longer do, but they still have all these great skills that they built in the career they had. So we can look at those skills and figure out how do those skills fit into different types of careers and help them with obtaining those careers. And then kind of back on the subject of recruiting, we have what's called the Talent Acquisition Portal. This was set up and developed by, it's called the NET, the National Employment Team. This team consists of all of the state directors and business service directors from vocational rehab across the United States. And they get together and they did some outreach to business nationwide and said, well, how can we help? And one of the things that came up was, of course, helping to hire a diverse workforce. And one of the tools that was brought about was the Talent Acquisition Portal. So this is a site where persons with disabilities can post their resumes and do job search with companies who are actively seeking persons with disabilities nationwide. So a lot of it is multi-footprint companies, that are throughout the nation who are actively seeking to hire persons with disabilities. So it's a good matching program that we have between persons with disabilities and people who want to hire people with disabilities. Talk a little bit about more related to Americans with Disability Act services. We have our disability awareness training, which is what we did in the beginning of this training. There's a lot of different varieties of that training, which is where the customized training portion comes in. There's been times where we've customized the training so it meets the needs of a business who does all virtual interviewing and virtual hiring. We'll change it up to make it more specific to hiring managers versus all staff. We've also customized a lot of other trainings, including mental health and mindfulness, which really talks about stress in the workplace and stress in personal life and how to alleviate that stress and other tactics that you can do to help alleviate stress. Injury prevention and wellness. We worked with a company up in the UP last year, big manufacturer, who was having a lot of repetitive motion injuries on the job. And we went in and investigated the positions. We took some video of people performing the tasks of the job and watched them working at work to see, what they're doing that might be causing injury. And then our occupational therapy team was able to use that feedback and those videos to develop a stretching program. So the stretching program was designed specifically for the employees that worked in this company to help them with preventing injuries. So now that company it's a mandatory stretching program by the company, and they're doing that twice a shift for the people that work for the company. Once when they first get there, and then another time at around lunch break. But this year, they've already noticed a decrease in repetitive motion injury on the job. So that's great. It's a great example of helping to prevent injuries and taking care of their employees. The final service on this page, it talks about facility ADAG evaluation, Americans with Disability Act accessibility guidelines. And those were developed to help ensure that places were accessible for people with disabilities. This includes the parking lot, making sure that parking spaces are available, accessible parking spaces are available, making sure they're in the right locations, making sure they're accessible for people with disabilities, making sure they have a straight line to the front entryway, making sure the entryways are accessible, making sure the door is not too heavy, making sure that the automatic openers function correctly, going into a building and making sure that there's carpets aren't too high or mats aren't too high, ensuring that restrooms are accessible, and it's from things from measuring the height of a toilet. The height not being high enough can cause significant problems for somebody who is trying to access using the restroom when using a wheelchair. But it also includes things like making sure other things are accessible, like public telephone systems and water fountains and things of that sort. But it's really looking at accessibility in public access areas for people who are trying to access services. This slide's focused more on work experience, paid internships, apprenticeships, on-the-job trainings. So we work hand in hand with our Michigan Works partners. I've had a couple examples already this year of working with my Michigan Works partners where we were able to do what we call an on-the-job evaluation. It's a short period of time where we bring in a candidate who is hired under a third party. So the business that we're working with has no liability. The liability is covered by the third party. The wages are covered by the third party. So our business partner can have someone come in for, let's say, a 2-week period and see if it's a good fit. Is it a good fit for our person, for our candidate with a disability? Is it a good fit for the business? And once that 2-week period is up, then it's time for the business to determine, are we going to hire this person? And if they're willing to hire the person, there's been times where I've worked with Michigan Works staff to do an on-the-job training. So we kind of just go from our on-the-job evaluation right to the Michigan Works on-the-job training. And it's been a great program because it provides the business with some resources so that they can be successful, because we all know the cost of hiring someone is really expensive. So having that 2-week trial to see, is this a good fit? helps out tremendously because it's no cost to them. It costs them some of their time, it costs them some training to help see if this is a good fit. But it really provides them with resources they need to be able to bring on new staff. In terms of apprenticeships, we've been actively working with Michigan Career Technical Institute, our school down in Plainwell. We have students that are coming out of there with training that can be applicable to apprenticeships. We call it a front-loaded apprenticeship, where the training portion is already completed. Most of the training portion is already completed. So they come into an apprenticeship just for the on-the-job training hours. So we're working with our staff at MCTI and bringing our students into work situations. And then I am always communicating with the apprenticeship coordinators within my area about potential apprenticeships in different areas, or if I have a candidate that would be a good fit for an apprenticeship. We just want to partner together. And if we can blend funds while we're doing that, the more the better for our business customer and better for our client customers. All right, so this is the last slide on services, and I kind of grouped a bunch of them together. All these services, I'm not going to go through all of them, but these are a lot of the services our occupational therapy team assist us with, because they come in with that vocational rehab knowledge and the medical knowledge, and they're able to do assessments in the workplace to ensure that it's accessible for people with disabilities, to help them figure out what types of reasonable accommodations they're going to need on the job, to help them figure out what chair works best for someone with a disability. And a lot of times we focus the accommodations on what we call universal design. And I'm going to share an example of the universal design. We were working with a company downstate. It was a packaging company. They had these big long lines and products were coming in. And one of the functions for the person who was working was to grab a little toggle switch and click the button. And it happened pretty often. It was like a couple times a minute that they were going back to that to toggle that switch. Well, this person had some fine dexterity issues, and it was very difficult for them to grab that little switch and be able to perform that task. So between us and our occupational therapists and the team at the business we're working with, they designed that switch differently. They made it into a large handle that stuck out, was high enough to make sure it wasn't in anybody's way. But it was designed so it was easier to just hit it, to be able to perform that function without having to use fine dexterity. And what they found was it was great for the person with a disability, made their performance much better, but it actually improved performance of everyone who was doing that task of the job. So it was a universal design. It was made good for everybody. As you go down the list, you see a lot of our services from our OTs are focused on, work site evaluations and ergonomics and making sure the workplace is fit for anyone with or without a disability. All right, we are on to the Q&A. This is an opportunity for Michigan Work staff to ask any questions you may have about business services, about our client customer services. So the floor is open. We still have 14 minutes to spare. Lots of time. Yeah, feel free to use the chat too. I see someone's typing. And know that we're always available for questions after the training as well. Susie and myself will be always be available to you. What's the referral process for MCTI?
Thanks. So for
Thank you,
MCTI,
Susie.
yeah, for MCTI, typically a person needs to have an open case with MRS. Once they do, and the vocational counselor and the customer determine that MCTI is the goal, Our counselor does a referral to MCTI. So unlike a traditional college or university, MCTI takes a look at somebody's academic abilities, physical and mental health to make a determination whether or not they're a fit for the program. Each of the programs has worked pretty extensively with industries, or I'm sorry, with businesses in the particular trade. And there is a minimum requirement for reading, math. There's a minimum requirement for physical ability, et cetera, to be able to be accepted into the trade. And so there is a admission staff that reviews MRS counselors' referrals to MCTI and makes a decision. Does that answer the question?
I think I see some thumbs up.
Excellent.
So. All right.
Sorry, and I was just gonna, I guess I'd lastly add that if you're working with a student that, or an individual that might have an interest in MCTI that doesn't have an open case with MRS, there are videos available on our website, which is michigan.gov/MRS. And there's a significant amount of resources about the college. And certainly someone can talk to the MRS counselor as well.
Thank you, Susie. Any other questions or comments? We're here for you. All right. I think we're good then. Again, thank you for having us today. We appreciate your time. It's always an honor to come and provide, information to our coworkers and to our partners. And again, we're here for you. If you have any questions afterwards, feel free to reach out to Susie or myself. Thank you very much.